Well, this week we begin our study of World War II. And as we go through World War II, we're going to study a lot of different political figures at the time. Uh, some we think very highly of, and others we do not think very highly of. But whoever we study at this time, this is not, especially the ones we don't think very highly of, this is not an endorsement of any of their ideas. But it is a chance to go through history and see how these people came to power. Can't remember who said it, but somebody said if you do not study your history, you are condemned to repeat it. So we're going to start our history of World War II, but it really had its seeds back at the end of World War I when we looked at the Versailles Treaty. And we're going to take a look at this particular lecture, the 1930s in Germany. And we'll take a brief look probably next week at a look at Italy and Japan during this time period. Excuse me, Italy and Japan during this time period also. Well, the intro to Adolf Hitler. He was a dictator, and I'm not going to read everything on these slides. And he went in when he got his political power. He wanted to build a 1,000-year Reich. It lasted probably a little bit more than 10 years. He did conquer most of Europe, though, before he was defeated by the hands of the Allies at the end or beginning of 1945. I'm not going to get through all Hitler's early life here. He really wasn't. He didn't like school very well. His parents were not very loving, and he really wanted to be an artist. And his art wasn't thought of too highly, so his art school was rejected. Here's a couple of his early paintings. I'm not an artist myself, but I guess nothing outstanding there. Well, World War I set in, and as you can see, he really excelled. In fact, he earned the Iron Cross during the time in his time in World War One. If you look at the picture there, he is on the bottom row, far left, and he finally felt at home, and he really enjoyed, if you want to call it that, he enjoyed being in the army. Well, after after World War One, if you remember, at the end of World War One, Germany pretty much just walked out. The Versailles Treaty went in. They were into ruin, and the country itself was in ruins. Had no money, nothing was going right, and the Nazi Party was formed as the Germans Workers Party, and you can read through this. And he really got his start here. He became a very popular speaker during this time for the German Workers Party. Interesting part as he got more and more involved in this and started to rise in the ranks as a leader. He had a few major themes here, and again, they called it this 25-point program, but really it was a nationalization of corporations, land reform, expulsion of the Jews. The Jews were the scapegoats for Germany's loss in World War One, and many people thought the same thing, and that was not a hard idea to convince the German population that this was true. He also organized his own private army called the SA, or the Stormtroopers, or sometimes known as the Brown Shirts also. His one of his first rallies, the Munich Putsch, the beer hall putsch, and you can go through and read this on your own, was the first real public. As you can see, they marched through the streets. The police opened fire. Again, the Nazis were not in power at this time. They were a pretty minor political entity at this time. The plot failed. Hitler was arrested, and his arrest kind of got him to be went from a little-known politician into a superstar. He really used his time in trial and in the courtroom to expound on his theories, and a lot of people bought into it. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, which, well, it was pretty much a country club for all practical purposes. At this time, he wrote his story, Mein Kampf, and became a national bestseller. He was on trial for treason, but really, this whole trial really launched him into the national political stage. He took the trial and turned it around and really made it a trial against the Weimar Republic, which was the government that was in power, and he turned himself into a patriot. He was found guilty, but he was sent really to what was called the country club prison. It really was not a prison in any stretch of the imagination. The book he wrote here was My Struggle, and put forward many of his beliefs, his ideas on race, as which we all know are not very nice or good, or however you'd like to phrase that. He felt the German people needed a Lebensraum, which was living space. And it was a short 9 months, and he was released from his prison sentence. And what he did find out during this time, that he couldn't overthrow the government. He would have to go into the voting booth and really use the democratic process to defeat the system. Well, the Great Depression, as we studied, hit the United States. Well, it also hit financial markets worldwide, and whatever economy Germany had, it just went under. There was just nothing left at all. Workers were laid off, banks failed, people's savings account dried up. The German people went into poverty, and at this point, they were willing to look at anybody or anything that they thought could lead them really out of this depression. They were tired of the ruling class, the Weimar Republic. They were tired of all this, and they were willing to look at extreme political ideas, and Hitler fit the bill. Well, Hitler did have a campaign, and he played the typical the propaganda. Joseph Goebbels was his propaganda organizer, and he was a great public speaker. We're going to look at a couple of his speeches, but he was they were very well staged. They were well put on. He knew what he had to do, and everything was built around his image. And as you can see here, profits industry, work for the unemployed, expansion of the army, which was a big deal, as the army was reduced to really nothing after World War I. And he really struck a chord by wanting the German people to get pride back into their country. And again, he wanted the end of reparations, because they were tired of the Treaty of Versailles, and again, the whole idea that you needed somebody to blame, and the Jews fit the bill at this time. It's also interesting to note he did many different rallies, and they were very well staged, orchestrated, photographed, and we'll look at a couple of these during our course here, and it's just interesting how people were just taken in by all this. But again, the people had nothing at this time, and they were willing to look at anybody and anything. You can read through all this. They went, they pretty much went and gained a lot of power in the Reichstag at the time, with Hitler as their leader. And as you can see, the 32 presidential election here. Von Hindenburg, he did win it again. Hitler decided to oppose him and run for president, and he tried, but he did. As you can see here, the campaign slogan was "Freedom and bread," and again, freedom from the Treaty of Versailles. And people had no food. They were not working. Well, Hitler received about 30%, and von Hindenburg 49%. And what you end up having was a runoff election because somebody had to receive an absolute majority, or 51%. As you can see here from the runoff election of 1932, Hitler got 36%, von Hindenburg 53%. Hitler lost, but really, as you look at it, he did win because he became very, very popular with the German people. And it's interesting, in the July elections, the Nazis received 37% of the total and up to 230 seats in the Reichstag, which is the ruling part of the government at the time in Germany. And you can see some different signs here. Very, very great use of propaganda. He had a propaganda machine that was probably unrivaled at the time, and everything was staged. He let nothing get by him when he was making his public appearances. And we'll look at our next part here. Well, thing on Hindenburg, you saw as popular as Hitler was, and Hindenburg was getting old. So Hindenburg did appoint him as chancellor. A chancellor kind of, think of England, a prime minister. Essentially, the chancellor ran the country. Hindenburg was old, and Hitler pretty much had his way at the time, but Hindenburg still was the president. Most people thought that Hitler and the Nazis couldn't turn the country around economically, and it was thought of by a lot of political pundits that the Nazis would fall to the wayside like all the others have. Well, that didn't quite happen because as the couple things happened, the Reichstag, or the Capitol building, burned, and it was supposedly set by a communist, but there's been a lot of studies and a lot of information that it was actually the Nazi Party that burned it down. Well, Hitler used this to his advantage, again, setting up emergency decrees. Really what it was martial law. And Hitler at this time started using the propaganda against the communists. And again, you got to remember, the communists were over in Russia, the Soviet Union, and they were looking to make inroads into Germany, seeing Germany's economic situation was in such dire straits. And you can read the rest of this on your own here. There's the burning of the Reichstag, and there's the person that supposedly said it. Historically, it's from things I've read, that's pretty inaccurate. It was the Nazi Party themselves that said it. Excuse me. Well, at this time, the whole idea of burning books. If you ever watched any of the Indiana Jones, I believe it is the third one in Indiana Jones. They were actually at the burning of the books in Berlin here. It was on German. Anything that had non-German ideas should be burned. And the whole idea that the state would educate the young people of Germany. And you can definitely think how they would be educated in the ways of the Nazis and the ideas of Hitler himself. You can go through it and read this yourself. Kind of interesting. He didn't care about science and math. He really wanted to indoctrinate the youth of Germany into the Nazi Party. That's really all it was. Well, once Hindenburg died, the Nazis, for all practical purposes, just took it over. The office of president and chancellor would now become the Fuhrer, and he had absolute control of the country. And kind of interesting, every individual in the German army had a sworn allegiance to Hitler. Not a lot of many of the people in the German army did not approve of him, but in order to stay in the army, you had to swear your allegiance. And at this point, he had the absolute power. He was an absolute dictator in Germany. Well, at this point, he built up the army, which was violated the Treaty of Versailles. He moved troops into the demilitarized zone, the Rhineland, and nobody was stopping him at this time. This whole idea of appeasement, and Chamberlain over in England appeased him. People just didn't want to go to war again. The war to end all wars in 1917 was only, you're looking at 20 odd years before. People did not, people knew this. They did not want the European continent going through that again. And they thought, well, if we give him a little bit, maybe he'll just back off and go away. Well, and again, when you have a dictator or a bully on the block, if you just kind of ignore him, give him his own way, he keeps wanting more and more. Hitler went in and took Austria. Austria was nowhere in any ability to fight the Germans alone. Hitler went in and took Czechoslovakia. And the European countries did nothing at the time. Especially, we're looking at France and Germany, or excuse me, France and England, really, at this point. And as you can see the area here, they started Czechoslovakia, Austria, the Rhineland. They started taking over. Well, finally, World War I started. Hitler invaded Poland. Again, there was some pretext as somebody in the Polish army went over on German soil. It was all fabricated. It was nothing but an excuse for Hitler to invade. He had this in his idea all along. He wanted to take over Europe. There wasn't no two ways about it. And then finally, the Allies at this time declared war on Germany a couple days afterward. Of course, France and England were in no way prepared to fight, and so it was really the Germans quickly overran Poland. One thing Hitler did so he would not have a war on different fronts, he had an alliance with Italy, with Benito Mussolini, who we will also look at, and they signed the Pact of Steel that tied the two countries together in the time of war. A couple of fascist dictators. He also signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, and he didn't want the Soviet Union to attack him, and so they agreed not to attack one another or interfere in each other's business.